So I think we're probably ready. Thank you so much to everybody for joining us today. And I want to wish you all a happy National Tree Week, because it is National Tree Week this week. My name is Sarah Long. I'm Chief Executive of the Tree Council, which is the national charity that brings everybody together for the love of trees. And it's a really special year for the Tree Council because it's our 50th anniversary. We launched the anniversary celebrations this week, if you like. We had a piece on BBC Breakfast where we were looking back to to plant a tree in 73, which was when Dutch elm disease had swept across the land. But we've also been looking ahead for the next half century, and we've been saying grow a tree in 23. So very much emphasizing the need to look after trees and to bring them to maturity. And for that, they need a bit of care. And I'm sure you'll hear more about that from our panelists in a little while. There's been a lot of planting going on this week. On Tuesday, I was in Gloucestershire at Oakbrook Community Farm, where we were planting 150 metres of hedgerow with lots of community volunteers. And our regional school leaders are out this week in England, Scotland and Wales, planting with school children. And then over the coming year, for our 50th anniversary, we're going to be planting 50 golden orchards, which will be golden apples, pears, plums, apricots, and so on. So a huge thank you to all our volunteers. I know that many of you are joining us today. Thanks to your help, we planted 220,000 trees last year, and we're aiming for the same or more this year. So thanks very much. So now to the exciting bit. A couple of weeks ago, I took part in a conference at the Royal Horticultural Society on a panel with two extraordinary people, ecosystem scientist Dr. Elisabeth Larsen and award-winning garden designer Arit Anderson. Now, it's always a tricky conundrum choosing the trees for your garden, and we're very honoured to have Liz and Arit with us today, together with John Stokes, who's the Tree Council's Director of Tree Science and Research, and they're going to share their thoughts on tree choice, how to ensure you choose the right tree, and the kinds of things that you will be thinking about as you do it. Before I hand over to them, one bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions, please can you put them in the Q&A and rather than the chat, and then John will be going to help with the questions. We'll do our best to answer as many as we can at the very end. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Liz Larsen, who's an ecosystem scientist working on the services provided by garden trees. She's a fellow at the RHS, and her work has taken her to many different countries and involved collaboration with some of the world's most eminent academic institutions. So I'm going to invite you all now to settle back comfortably. And as Liz shares her thoughts and her research story, so it's over to you, Liz.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Sarah. Now, let me see if I can just share my screen. Can you all see that?
Need to go to full slide.
Yes. And I'm started in the middle of my presentation, which is not what I want. I'm starting here. So we're good to go. Thank you so much. Yes. Like Sarah said, I work on ecosystem services provided by garden trees. And I'm also very interested in how trees function and how they are adapted to a changing climate, and especially in urban settings where gardens can have a high impact, and what trees we choose can have a big impact. And so today I'm going to talk a bit about the benefits they provide, and it's a collaboration with Frank P. Matthews, which is a tree nursery. And for those who are not familiar with the RHS, we are a garden charity which have 5 main public gardens throughout the UK and arrange flower shows. Over 600,000 members that can get free garden advice from our advisory team. But what is kind of maybe less known is that we also have a big science department. And in 2021, we opened this new science building at Wisley, which is where I am based, where I am today as well, where we have a lot of scientists working on different aspects relating to environmental science in gardens. And my project is really related on ecosystem services, which can broadly be defined as the benefits that flow from nature to people, which is a definition that I quite like, because flow is kind of less forced than other definitions, because ecosystem services can sometimes feel like it's just nature is only there to provide us service, which is obviously we want nature to have their own intrinsic value, and we're part of nature. But it is a good example of how we can. It's a good framework when we are fighting for kind of the cause of green space, especially in our urban environments where there's often a lack of space. So for that reason, I think it's a good way of putting a monetary value and also assessing and quantifying what we need. And this is to the right there, you can see summarizing table of different environmental aspects that they can provide. I mainly work on the physical aspect of it, so the interception of rainfall, carbon sequestration, the providing of shade and shelter, and evaporative cooling, which is what I'm going to go a little into now. So first, are gardens important? This is a bit of a leading question. I'm sure I don't have to convince anyone here. But what I mean with this is a bit broader speaking. Is it important kind of on an ecological value or an ecological scale? So just to put some numbers on it, in the UK, residential gardens make up around or over 500,000 hectares. I always try to compare that to value so it makes more sense. The Lake District is about 200,000, a bit over, so it's more than double one of the Lake Districts. It's probably better numbers you can measure against it, but it also has 30% of urban space in the UK, and 25% of all urban trees are found here. So when we look at these numbers, we can see how it can start to have a real impact on diversity, services, wildlife support, and other environmental aspects. And to the right, you can see and summarizing on the different aspects that we're working with in my team, where we're both looking at responding to the changing climate, how we can harness the diversity of horticulture, the species and cultivars, and promoting sustainability. And we're also working on gardening and plant and how we can have a positive impact for human health and well-being. So if anyone's interested in kind of what we do as a team, because we really are spreading broad from soil science to well-being science. We just published an opinion paper where we're going through our main aim, which is improving our understanding of the linkages and interactions between soil, water, plants, weather, and people. So within those gardens, trees are often the longest living and largest plants, which is why they can have such a direct and big effect. And also because my background is in tree research, this is really where I focus. And they can have a direct impact on biodiversity and create resilience without our urban landscapes, increase our canopy cover and well-being, and really provide a range of services simultaneously. So we want to improve that understanding of really there's not one reason to plant a tree, but often a mix of services that they can provide. And especially within urban environment, because there are challenges there that are worsened because of how dense these structures often are. So when we have extreme heat, we have the urban heat island, which makes it always a few degrees hotter in the city. Flooding is worse for the lack of runoff places to drainage. We have high air pollution, noise pollution, and a lot of lack of habitat for food and wildlife, and also lack of green space for humans. So if we know that trees are good for all of these reasons, why do we cut them down? We sent out a survey, this was last December, which my colleague Chloe Sutcliffe ran, which was a collaboration with it was taken from YouGo. So it's pooling a demographic which is representative in the UK. It's not pointed at just at gardeners. And we asked why people had to cut down their trees or why they did it. And these are kind of the same 7 main reasons. I'm interested to hear other reasons as well, if people have had to cut down their trees, but a lot of them related to size, too large for the space available, too close to buildings, creating too much shade. And I just love this picture from the Metasequoia in my neighborhood, because it's just absolutely towering over that house and all the neighboring houses, but they still don't cut it down, which I love because it's a great tree. But you can understand why people have to or choose to do because of various reasons, and a lot of them related to not having the capacity or not having the space, and just maybe not appropriate tree selection, that you have a tree that maybe outgrow their space or is not appropriate for where you are. So we always want trees to kind of stay in their gardens rather than be cut down. So it's better to have a good kind of evaluation before you plant it than just plant something and then later having to take it down. And so scientifically, there is a lot of literature on this, on, you know, which species deliver which services, and there are some traits that are linked to different service delivery, and this is all the time getting updated. We know that particulate capture is good to have kind of rough leaves and hairy leaf area and large dense canopies. Same is true for noise reduction in terms of dense canopies, and for rainfall attenuation, so capturing rainfall, we often want larger, wider canopies, which large leaf area. And for wildlife and insects, we often want kind of a mixture of plantings, so both native and near native, and a mix of exotic species to prolong that flowering season. And what about cooling? So this is one of the aspects that I've been working with a lot lately, and we know that even in the UK we're going to have more heat waves, and last year we had a record of 40 degrees in the UK, and this is worse in dense areas, and we know there is a high confidence that this is going to increase in the future. This is from the IPCC report 2021, and also this quote is from the climate book. A person born in 1960 will experience only 4 major heat waves. A child born in 2020 will experience 18 such events. So we know these events are much likely to get worse, and that they are worse in urban areas. So what can trees do? Well, trees mitigate heat in 2 main ways. We have transpirational cooling, and which can, you know, urban vegetation can reduce air temperature between 0.5 degree to 8 degrees. So the direct transpiration and taking the absorbed solar radiation and convert that to water vapor, that energy is used without releasing more temperature, a higher degree, so which is why you can call it kind of an avoided heating of the urban environment. And then you have cooling through direct shade, which is the direct shade that it provides you under the canopy. And that can be even higher. It can reduce surface temperature up to 20 degrees, but of course you need to be below the canopy for it to directly have an effect on you. And so this cooling capacity really depends on where it's planted and the meteorological factors within that space. Obviously, if you're in a lot hotter country, higher temperatures, you're going to have a higher effect, and also species selection. You know that higher transpiration will directly lead to more cooling through transpiration, and the larger leaf area index, which is the leaf area divided on the ground cover that canopy provides, gives greater cooling effect through shading. But we also know that with higher temperature, we're going to have a drier atmosphere, which is going to, or we're going to have a warmer atmosphere, which is going to dry out more water from both the soil and plants. And so we can't just have high transpirational trees, because that might be a problem for irrigation in really hot and dry areas. And there's many methods of assessing this. We have both, you can model it on large scale, and this always needs validation through actually measurements. You can do field work, which range from site surveys to monitoring and measurements. Or you can have experiments, which have experimental design, replicates, measurements in a setup. So just a quick dip into some of the work we've been doing for the last 2 years. I have a 2-year trial of 10 garden cultivars, We measure continuous measurement of sap flux, which is a proxy of transpiration, and other measurements related to cooling, and also some wood measurements that are related to carbon sequestration and storage. And this is a drone image just from above. You can see 4 of 6 blocks where all these trees are then randomized so they can be measured. And these are some of the cultivars measured. I'm not going to go into which cultivars they are because this is in the process of getting published, but when it is, it's going to be available for everyone. I just thought it was interesting to show you this graph. So this is sap flux. You can think of it as transpiration. And in 9 different cultivars throughout the day in the hottest month of the year, which was July 2022. And you can see how different species react to the hotness of the day. So you can see this is the time at this area. So you can see that some species are staying pretty low, but some species start off really steep and then kind of level off or go down during peak solar radiation and heat, because they don't necessarily respond, or they respond very sensitively to high temperatures. And just to quickly go into a project that I can talk about the species, because it was a master project that was finished in August. We just wanted to go into how the different colors of the cultivars could have an effect on transpiration rate, because we know that the light colored leaf will reflect more sunlight and the dark colored leaf would absorb more. And so we had them in the greenhouse trial for 6 weeks. And just what I want you to take away from this is that actually the yellow one transpired the least, and the green one the most, until we had a very hot week, and then the red one transpired the most. And then when we did the correlation between temperature, this is soil temperature, and transpiration, we can see that the red one had the highest correlation. And this is a very quick dip into it, so you can ask me more about it later, but the conclusions from this project was that the green cultivars had the cooler leaf temperature than the purple and yellow, and the purple leaf cultivars compensated for the dark color with the higher transpiration rate, so they would provide actually equal or more cooling, but then you would have to have irrigation. And the golden cultivar had the highest leaf temperature, despite of being the lighter color. And so just to conclude on kind of what ecosystem services we want, I mean, that's the question I usually ask people when they ask me what tree to plant. I usually throw that back at them. Do we want cooling, flood mitigation, carbon sequestration, support for wildlife, pollution mitigation, noise reduction, well-being? Do you want a nice and pretty tree? It's okay to want more than one service from a tree, but we can't expect to plant like one tree that's going to answer all your problems with the environmental aspect. So it really depends on kind of the priority and the area you're located. And just to summarize, trees can provide a range of ecosystem services, and it depends on the species in addition to where it's planted and the landscape and season. And that the garden trees covering 25% of the urban trees can provide essential benefits to wildlife and humans. And I just included this plants of pollinators because it's one of the aspects that we are already providing at the RHS. We can go in and look at which trees, not just trees, also different plants are actually very beneficial for different pollinators, because it's a research project that's been going on for a while with entomologists at the RHS. And we're hoping to do this for environmental benefits as well, so we can combine it. And just very lastly, I hope I've stuck to time. We have a conference next year for anyone who's interested. That was going to be at Wisley Green Cities Conference related to all aspects of green infrastructure in September next year. There's the website for more information, or you can email Green Cities. And I have to thank my team, because I'm not alone doing this. And thank you so much for listening to me today.
Oh no, Liz, thank you so much. It was really fascinating to hear more about your research, and I'm sure we look forward to seeing the publication when you can release the results, if you like. But we'll do questions at the end. Now we're going to hand over to our other expert panelists. I'm going to invite Arit to come back on screen. Hi, Arit. So Arit Anderson. Arit is a Chelsea award-winning British garden designer, writer, and television presenter. She's presented on BBC Gardener's World. She came to gardening after a 25-year career in the fashion world and has just published a new book on garden trees, which is so successful that they're already talking about a second print run just weeks after the launch. So, Arit, over to you.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. Well, and also thank you, Liz, listening to all of that information, taking it all down, which is great. So I'm just going to talk a little bit of background about myself, which is always a bit weird talking about yourself, but I never want to assume that people know what I've been up to. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay.
All good.
Okay, great. So, yeah, as Sarah said, my background was in fashion originally in terms of the mainstay of what I did. And I also used to do holistic therapy work as well. But I think, like with most people, the question of how did you get into gardening, it was to get a garden. This is the garden that I inherited on the left. That's what I arrived to on September 2010. I'd never gardened before. I'd enjoyed gardens. I wasn't brought up in a gardening family, really. So to have this sort of space was kind of daunting, but exciting at the same time. And my sister had said to me, you just need to wait a year, see what's going on, see what comes up. And in about the March time, not much had happened between September and March, funnily enough. And I'm very impatient. So I thought, well, let's see if I can get started somehow. So the picture on the right, no, it's not a dead body layout. It is me having some idea of what I think I could carve the beds out with to make it a bit bigger. So it was literally learning by doing. And I think it's important that I share that message because a lot of people think that you'll just wake up and you're born into gardening. And I want people to know that you can start at any time. So this was what happened in the space of one season. Okay, it wouldn't probably get me Chelsea medals, I have to say. But my sister was, who I mentioned before, she was beyond impressed that I'd actually managed to get some plants growing and get some life into the garden. And it was at that point I thought I would retrain and go and do garden design. Now, I always talk to people about gardener heroes. This is my sister, Michelle, and her husband, Pete. And I think this is always an important slide, is that whether it's in your family, in your professional life, you always need to have some garden hero who can be there steering and guiding you. And they've always been there, being incredibly supportive of what I do. And that's very important, especially when you are trying to learn so much, which I know that we all are doing all of the time. So that's how I started gardening. Yes, that outdoor living van is not mine, unfortunately. I had a Mini. And yes, it looks like a great big container, to be honest. But I wanted to get going and get the experience of working in some gardens. And so you have to make use of what you have. And that's how I got myself on a gardening round local to me. I went to college, Capel Manor, and trained with these two other girls there, Anna Murphy and Sarah Jarman. And some of you may recognise Sarah Eberly, who was our mentor. But in our first year, we entered a competition with the RHS for Fresh Talent, and we won. And it was quite a surprise. We were there really for the experience of doing it. But the importance of that was that it got us onto the Chelsea stage, if you like, but more importantly, around some of our really top designers, which was such an incredible experience, and kind of meant that we pushed ourselves a bit further than what we thought we could do, but we achieved it and was very proud of that. That then led me on to designing a garden for Hampton Court in 2015. So I'd literally just qualified. And at that point, in 2015, which sort of is only 8 years ago, it's quite interesting to think that we wasn't really talking about climate change so much within our garden arena. It was still almost in the sort of environmental arena, and actually probably, if I'm honest, more in the political arena. We wasn't really thinking of the connection of the environment with our gardens. And this garden was called Near Future Garden. What would our gardens look like in the future? What was the messaging and the types of plants that we'd need to be looking at, and how might they be different? Because of course, in the UK, we have quintessential, lovely English gardens. And I just remember thinking there was one time where in my garden at the time, I had some peonies, and we'd had probably one of those first massive rain deluges. And I just saw those beautiful peonies that had taken all the way through till May to come to fruition, demolished within one rainfall, and also knowing that they weren't repeat flowering, that was it for the season. So that had kind of already just started to get me thinking about well, you know, what would things look like, because we was already starting to experience hotter summers and those wetter downpours, which were becoming to be a bit more extreme. But 2015 feels so far away, when in the last sort of even 3 to 5 years, the acceleration of the weather in the UK has become more to the forefront. So I guess this was a way of being able to kind of start to bring message in. Yes, that is Chelsea. That is what you get given. A blank piece of paper. All of a sudden, your drawings, you think, oh, how am I going to make that 3D? But you do. And there it was. The garden was televised, which was really something beyond my wildest dreams, because, again, as I said, we wasn't really talking about climate change at the time. And the message of the garden was about using renewable energies. The sculptures that you can just about see, one behind Mr. Don there, Monty, and one behind me, were showing about how man and the elements need to work better together. That was the kind of key messaging about this garden. But the point that it actually did get onto the Hampton Court show was more about the fact that, okay, maybe there's a little bit of appetite to start talking about gardens and climate. And at the same time, I've been working with the climate scientist who had just been appointed. It was the RHS's first appointment of a climate scientist, Dr. Eleanor Webster. And so it was quite exciting to be talking with her and getting to understand some of the research that was being done with the RHS. I was then invited to talk at their Changing in the Garden climate report in 2017, which is available on the website, which was starting to ask those questions that gardeners were beginning to notice, these changes that were happening in their garden. And as a brand new garden designer, in honesty, what did I know? How did I know I was making the right choices? How did I know that I could be making a difference, or maybe causing more damage? So that then led on to going on to Gardeners Wild, and that's all the lovely part of it in Chelsea, and getting involved with the TV and media a bit more. And the thing about that is, I think people now hopefully become to see that I'm like to quite champion those conversations around the environment, but on behalf of the audience, because I'm very conscious of the fact that you don't know what you don't know, and a lot of information is very difficult to digest about what are the right decisions. We're all going through this together, the climate change and environmental change. And as across the world, we're all learning, and obviously having people like Liz doing research for us is just amazing. Yes, there's highlights and glamour that comes with some of that. Obviously, one of my highlights was meeting Sir David Attenborough when he was being honoured by the Landscape Institute, and that's great. But for really, in amongst all of the sort of nice dresses and frocks that I get teased about, you know, it is about talking with people about their experiences as the world starts changing around us, and how that can impact us within our gardens. I had the real privilege of being able to do a garden on DIY SOS. And the reason why I bring this particular piece in was about the healing aspect of gardens, and obviously trees as well. So in the far background, I don't know if you can just about see past that pergola, there are some birch that were put in. This particular lady, without going into her story, had a huge amount of trauma that had occurred in her garden. And one of her places of solace was to go and walk in woodlands close to her. So in this instance, it was about being able to bring us a piece of woodland into her garden that she would be able to enjoy as part of her healing. And that was very important to her, and also for me to be able to help her get to that. The RHS then commissioned me to do one of their feature gardens, the Garden of Hope, carrying on that feeling of healing, if you like, because this was going to be going to a mother and baby unit in Dartford. But the wood there, the steam bent timber, again, I think there was obviously a connection to trees going on there that was really important to thread through the garden. And that garden was then relocated and is now serving purpose, helping women who've had trauma after they've had their babies. So that has led to doing a podcast about being more sustainable as gardeners. What can we do? And the podcast has been well received, so I'm told. We did do a piece on trees with Tony Kirkham, which was great. We managed to do a great interview with Dame Judy Dench, who is a massive tree lover and an advocate of planting trees. And I think, again, this is very much about this broadcasting, is to help the general public understand more about some of the issues that we are facing. So I'm looking down because it's very weird to be looking back on myself. But anyway, and that has led to this book, The Essential Tree Selection Guide. Now, I was very lucky to be hosting an event for the Society of Garden Designers, where Henrik, who's the co-author of this, who's the science behind this book, he was talking, and I really loved how he was talking about trees. If I'm honest, up until this point, I think a lot of tree selection had been based on height and spread and season of interest were the kind of key elements of tree selection. Of course, one would need to know, well, does it need more clay soil, or, you know, can it be more adapted to, you know, sunnier positions or more shady positions? But the primary was much more around this aesthetic element. And listening to Henrik talk and really mirroring a lot of what Liz's work has been as well, was brought my attention so much to the incredible benefits that trees can give to us. Now, I guess I'm talking to an audience already who are tree lovers, but really being able to get behind how trees function and what they do. And I was asked by a publisher, if I'd like to write a book. Felt a bit daunting, a bit scary, writing a first piece. So I thought maybe a collaboration would be good. And I thought, hey, do you know, it would be great to write about trees, especially in this changing climate. So it's in 4 parts. The first part is about the hidden benefits of trees. A lot of what Liz has just spoken about, these ecosystem services that trees and the natural world have. I love the fact that you talked about the flow, Liz, that can flow towards us, that they're not just there as a given. We have to play our part in being able to ensure that these benefits come to light by being able to look after these trees and get them to maturity. The benefits only come through us selecting the right trees and being able to get them to be mature. The second part of the book was about think like a tree. Yes, I know trees don't think specifically, but to be in the understanding of how trees function and what sites that they come from, where do they live, what do they need, how do they strategize to get to full maturity in their natural environment. And then, of course, once we can understand that and the mechanics of how that works, it becomes a lot more intriguing in terms of how and what we plant in our gardens. But the first thing is about understanding how trees work. Then, of course, the fabulous glossary at the back, Henrik's 25, 30 years of experience and research at the Gotham Botanical Gardens where he's based. He's put together a directory of 550 species and cultivars and drilled down into the detail of which ones are more functional in flooded conditions or that can tolerate drought, and really kind of drilled into the detail of the ecosystem services that each of these trees can offer. So it becomes then a tree directory that is beyond the aesthetic. Aesthetic is incredibly important. Trees are about placemaking. We all know how upset everybody was when the sycamore gap tree disappeared. Trees do have aesthetic value for sure, but we needed to understand that these trees are going to be more I don't want to use the word future-proof because our future is changing so quickly, but that these trees that are in this directory have got more capacity, the key word that Henrik uses, the capacity to be able to work in our changing environment. And then the last part of the book is very much about a selection table, which is a lookup table that makes it a lot quicker to sort of see the trees that you might have liked and then go and have a look and see, well, how does it perform in flooded areas, drought, wind tolerance, biodiversity support, etc. So we really envisage that this book is going to be well thumbed, that it will have lots of post-it notes in it where you flick back from one page to the other. It is a book that we've tried to write to be good for professionals in our trade who are planting huge amounts of trees, but also for the public. The public we know are really behind the tree planting and tree care, the trees that we have already in our portfolio around the country, and looking after them. This is also directed at them. There is science within the book, but we hope that it's been delivered in such a way that is palatable and understandable for everybody to see. Often it's a case of, well, what is it that we need to be asking? And there are lots of questions, but I think reflecting on what Liz has talked about, that there are, in broad brush, 3 key questions. What do we want from our chosen tree? What is it that we are looking for within our garden or in our public space? Are we looking for shade cover, or are we looking for aesthetic value? Are we looking to increase biodiversity use in terms of extending nectar and the seasonality of nectar availability, for example? What is it that we want from this chosen tree? Why are we choosing this tree in the first instance? And then once we've understood what the need is from this tree, then we have to understand that the trees that we might like to look at, well, where do they come from in the natural environment, and what are their strategies for growth, and how do they operate? Because it's really important that we understand that we are going to bring a tree that is naturally lived on a mountainside. How do we then bring that and decide to put it into a really exposed, open, hot environment in the middle of the city and expect it to survive? So we need to kind of understand now about where these trees are from. And then the final, I guess, part of that is, and therefore, what trees are we going to choose for that changing climate? Because there's where we are now, and then there are the projections of where we're going. So certainly I can think in my garden how hot it's become in the last few years, being in this small space, and how the smaller trees that I've put in have already started to provide some of that cooling that Liz mentioned earlier. So that's my garden now, a little bit messy. Excuse the the wheelbarrow that's still out there, a couple of bags, but it's changed quite a bit, as you can see, from where I've originally started. And that green canopy that sits within my garden now is already shifted and changed my garden from being a reasonably sunny open aspect to almost what I'd say woodland edge. And I just wanted to pick up on 2 elements that Liz spoke about in terms of why we need to why trees might come out. And I can think even in my own garden, in the very forefront, I can't show a pointer, unfortunately, but right in the top left corner, you can just about see the leaves of an acer tree there. Well, originally that was a silver birch, and my neighbour, was insistent that I took the silver birch out because she was allergic to the pollen that it gives off, and I was devastated because I really didn't want this tree to come out. But she was suffering and it was very difficult. So that was a tree that had to be removed. And then unfortunately, she then moved 2 years later. So think about that as well. Before you take trees out on behalf of other people, are they here to stay? Because the tree had to go and then she moved. There you go. And just behind the studio unit at the back there is a very large eucalyptus that I inherited. It's still with me, but a little bit like the size, it was the right tree in the wrong place. And it's really gotten far too big for the space that it's there. I'm trying to kind of keep on top of it in terms of pruning, but of course, the more it's pruned and reduced, the bigger it's getting. But there will come a point when potentially that tree does need to come out. But the key thing that I've learned, and the key thing that we're all trying to do, is think about the succession of trees. Woodlands change, trees do come down, that's what happens. So I need to start thinking about what tree will I plant, start planting now, so that when the tree at the back needs to come out, I'm ready to go with one for its replacement. So I hope that was of some use, and I'm sure we're going to be moving on to some Q&A shortly.
Thank you so much, Arit. That was absolutely brilliant. I'm going to hand over to John.
So hi, everybody. So questions in the Q&A boxes, please, if you've got questions for either Liz or Arit. And we've got one to start for either of you. Do garden trees suffer from having grass or lawns at their base, in your opinion?
I can start with that one if you want. All right. Thank you for giving the examples of your trees of your own garden. That's really interesting. I wouldn't use the word suffering from grass under the trees, but the grass also will take water. So if you have a very shallow rooted tree, then it can compete a little bit with the water, but it also reduces the radiation if you have, compared to like pavement or hard landscape. So in a hot area, I would say it's more beneficial than not, because it reduces that really hot surface under the tree, which also will make it have to transpire more. In a hot area, I would say it's beneficial if there's enough sunlight for the grass to grow under the tree.
Yeah, I think that's sort of often it's about, I think it's about thinking of resource. So any planted material needs a resource of light, water, nutrients, and so there is definitely conversation around not planting lawn, not having lawn right up to certainly not up to the trunk, and just being again mindful of the fact that there can be some shallow roots of the tree that are near the surface. So of course mowing over those as well can be quite difficult, or trimming.
Oh yeah, that's true.
So,
Yeah.
There's some practicality around that. And also as well, it means that I think, as you just said, Liz, is that if you are having to help trees with any level of irrigation in extremes, it's a lot easier, I think, to be able to water into those zones when there's not the lawn area right up to the base.
And that's all particularly true when you have a young tree, of course. So when you have a young tree that's getting established, all the evidence has shown historically that it really does matter if you keep the grass away for the first 2 or 3 years. And I unearthed a paper a few weeks ago, back from the 70s, which showed that a metre radius of weed-free on a new tree can triple its growth in 3 years. So it really does matter to keep that away, particularly in those first 3 years. Yeah. So that's that one. So we have, Kathy says, Arit, that she particularly loved that small tree in your garden, the one that was leaning over, and she's trying to find one that has that form. So leaning over small trees, apple shade, of which yours was an example. Do you have, what was that one, and do you have?
Yeah, well, that was an Acer Janala. So that's a nice pretty tree, not hugely big, probably get to about 4.5 meters in height and spread. And it does have a nice canopy where it's dense enough to give me shade, but dappled enough to still let light through. So and I do really enjoy that tree. There's also for an evergreen perspective in the garden, I've got a multi-stem ceanothus, which again has that sort of arching habit to it, and is quite nice at this time of year as everything else is dropping its leaves. That works. The other trees that I find that can be quite nice for that as well, thinking of a client where I had put in some crab apples. Again, if really nice. You get obviously the spring blossom, which is great for pollinators, and then the birds feasting on the crabapple at the end. This is actually quite a nice time of year, actually, to go to tree nurseries and to see trees denuded, as it were, or if that's the right term, but so that you can actually see the actual shape of the tree without just the leaf canopy on it as well, because that can sometimes sort of help you just to be able to see the structure of the tree if you're specifically looking for something very aesthetic. We took a client of ours out and she found it quite useful. Of course, she was very excited to want to see them in leaf as well.
Fantastic, thank you. Anything, Liz, to add to that, or?
No, I don't think so.
No problem. So Jane asked a question. She wants to know about varieties of trees that are not very water hungry, so that they can plant them in her garden without any fear of subsidence. And I guess, Arit, that goes to your point about understanding the biology of trees and looking for trees that like it on dry soils.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that it's great to get a little bit more into understanding your site, which it looks as if Jane is beginning to look at that, and making sure that any trees that you choose that you've done some research on. One of the things it's quite, I mean, there's probably quite a few trees that can work for that. But again, it goes back to that first question that I've said, that there's an exhaustive, have you got your exhaustive list of what it is that you need? And then there's a huge amount of trees that can kind of marry into that as well. And it's not just about the plug for the book, because you can go anywhere and find some of that research out. But because obviously, if I was to say certain trees now, it might be too big, too small, depending on what else it is that you want to offer. There are other considerations when planting trees. Yes, there's the soil condition and that strategy, but there's also things, for example, that come into it, which is, well, also, does that tree have a really, what we call a high branch index? Is it got a lot of branch structure that actually will cause great shading in the summer months, but it will also shade in the winter months when you actually want as much sunlight to infiltrate. So there's a little bit more complexity that can go into this that can really make sure that you've got the right tree for you. So yes, I hope that answers a little bit of the why, what needs to happen, as opposed to, I know it's not a specific tree.
It does. Liz?
Yeah, no, I would very much agree with that. And I think that subsidence is really a problem if it's I think it comes into size a lot as well. If you have a small tree free space, you know, it can be a small water loving species as well. It can be fine if you look at the size of your place. It's not gonna cause a problem, most likely, unless it is a very large tree that is also very water thirsty.
Okay, thank you both.
I think one just last thing to add to that, just as you said, because obviously everyone gets very panicked about trees and tree roots, and that goes as well about really understanding, isn't it, how much water can physically get into your site and where the tree would be going to search for water as well. So that, yeah.
It will always head for the drains if there's a crack in it. Yeah. So just don't have a crack in the drains, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
There's I don't know whether to ask this one. Bee's asked a slightly tangential question, which she says, is it okay to grow some edible mushrooms around your tree?
Oh.
I don't know. I don't know specifically, depending on what kind of mushrooms. I think I would say a lot the same as with the grass. I mean, in woodlands you have mushrooms, you know, up to the tree, and so if you can, yes.
Yeah, it depends, I guess, on the conditions. I mean, one thing that I'm waiting for them to start fruiting now, but I've got some some logs that have been inoculated with edible mushrooms. So it might be more a case of trialing that first to make sure you've actually got the correct conditions, because it's not totally easy, but I'm giving it a go and keeping the moisture levels and things right. So yeah, watch this space. But that might be another way to be able to get the mushrooms going to start off with.
And lion's mane, have you got? Is it lion's mane you've got in your logs? Which is
got what have I got? I think I've got a shiitake in one of them. I think I've got a shiitake in one of them. Yeah.
So from my perspective, I would just be careful, anybody who does explore this, that you actually know the definition of edible, because some people's edible mushrooms are not everybody else's. So just don't randomly eat mushrooms, basically.
And can I also just add that a lot of compost has, it often grows mushrooms by itself. So if you've grown it and you put some like mulch around it, and you just be careful, there could be other types of mushroom in that compost as well.
Absolutely. So Kerry asks, do you see any evidence of local authorities and councils changing their varieties of trees and in their parks and gardens as the climate is changing? Start with Liz, maybe, on that one.
I don't know if I see, well, no, if I can just like see what I'm seeing, then yeah, I think I've seen a bit more. There's I mean, there's been an element that is only like only 12 different species that are the top planted in cities, and that we need more variety. And I think now, especially in terms of droughts being a big issue, I've seen a lot of ginkgos planted around. I've definitely seen kind of more experimental councils, more pear trees. I mean, that's maybe been used before as well. So I can start to see it, but I don't have any numbers for what's actually going in from the council side. I can just kind of what I have observed. I don't know if you have like actually worked with it, John.
Yeah.
So there's, as far as I'm aware, there's no hard statistics on that about the changes of species loss, but it's a very good question, Kerry, and we'll see if we can look up some stats for you and come back to people with an answer to that one. I'm not aware of any hard statistics in that space.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any knowledge specifically of councils, to be fair. I know, for example, the National Trust are looking at the portfolio of trees across the estates that they've got, and as much as they're looking to do some more robust actual planting, I think that for those sort of people that I've been speaking to, even with the RHS, Liz, there's a very much a conversation around species diversity. I think that, as you said, Sarah, with Dutch elm disease, even, too many of one species, it can go, number one, anyway. But secondly, that there is definitely a thought process around having to manage the different trees that we're going to need for the future. I've heard that through, like I said, National Trust. I was up at Royal Edinburgh Botanical Gardens in Edinburgh. I think everybody's having a look north, south, east to west about where their trees are and how they're managing. How that's playing out at a council level, like you said, John, I'm not sure.
Right. I think we probably haven't got time for many more questions, so we just do one last one, which is a very quick one, which Naomi says, are trees happy in containers?
The short answer, I would say they're happier out of the container in the ground, but some species are more well apt to grow in more confined spaces than others. So they would be happier often in the ground, but sometimes it's the best way to do it. If you have a very small space, or you have like a hard gardening and you want just some small stature trees, and look at the ultimate size again, they can also be happy in containers.
Yeah. And I just add to that, of course, because everybody's space is totally different. And of course, we'd rather people have some level of tree up close and personal to them. The advice would be to make sure that you can get the largest container that you can within that space. It's all about, again, thinking of resource. The more soil I'm able to give it, the more moisture it can hold, the more nutrients that can be in there to keep it healthy. I've had to plant trees in containers for clients that have only got courtyard gardens. And of course, the caveat to your point, Liz, is that the longevity of that life of that tree is going to be compromised. But yeah, I would rather say, if you are going to plant it, yes, we'd rather you plant it than not. Yeah.
And as a bit of a bonsai, I don't know what the right word is, person myself, you can even think about bonsaiing some of them if you get it right. So, and at that point, Sarah, I'm afraid we've run out of time for further questions. So I'm going to pass back to you.
Okay, I wanted to thank you all so much, Liz, Arit, and John, for sharing there's such a wealth of knowledge between you and expertise. And I'm sure that you've inspired everybody over the coming season to go out and plant trees in their gardens and hopefully also in other places too. There's just a couple of last bits of news before we close. The first is, if you've got some young people in your family, say 7 to 15-year-olds, do please alert them to a wonderful competition that we have with the Week Junior Science and Nature, which is a challenge to write a story or a poem linked to nature or the natural world in some way, up to 500 words. It can be less if you wish. We're putting the link in the box, and there's a chance to win a £100 voucher, and there's £30 vouchers for runners-up. And on top of that, your school could win £150 too. So the competition has now run for 2 or 3 years. We've had some really beautiful entries from people. So I say, just to get the word out, if you know of young people, please do share the link with them and encourage them to enter. And then the second bit of news was the Tree Council has been invited as part of our 50th anniversary to be a Radio 4 Charity of the Week in December, just before Christmas. And we have Ben Fogel, who's the explorer and adventurer, who also loves trees.